Welcome to All Villa, No Filler. Please like and subscribe below. Now, Aston Villa are preparing for a big season back in Europe, and this has already been a busy summer. Today, I'm joined by football journalist and Ranks FC podcaster Sam Tighe to preview what Villa might get to in the coming weeks and months. Sam, welcome back to All Villa, No Filler.
Thank you very much for having me again. You picked a good week. All sorts happening here. We talked to, we sorted this out, 4 or 5 days ago. Yeah, we'll chat Monday, no problem. In the space of those 4 or 5 days, good grief. The storylines, the topics, they've just been piling up. I keep looking at it and going, wow, that's going to be a long call with Frankie, that.
Yeah. It's like watching one episode of Breaking Bad, it just all happens. And you say, what's going on? So Sam, I mean, look, sort of mentioned it. First of all, today, we're recording Monday, big breaking news at Villa. CEO Christian Purslow has stepped down after 5 years at the club. It's a big moment, maybe not necessarily a shock given the movements of Villa in recent months, but what do you make of it?
I am still surprised that it happened so suddenly, because it has been a bit, may not have been a shock that something may have been happening, but it was just kind of dumped on us, Monday morning. And yes, we know there's been moves made in the background and we know that they've been restructuring a little bit, but you never just assume someone like Christian Purslow is going to lead the club because he's been such a huge part of the transformation of Aston Villa over the last 4 or 5 years. I think it's very hard to gauge exactly how effective people in his role are. And when you're looking from the outside in, it's really hard for us to figure out what he has genuinely done and what he hasn't done, what's to blame, what we should praise him for. And I think the same applies to pretty much anyone in an executive role and also anybody in a coaching role. It's very hard to discern how effective certain people are at certain things when they're not footballers who play on the pitch and you watch them play. But for the most part, a very positive presence for Villa, particularly in taking over the job, obviously, when Villa are in the Championship and then rising up. It feels like he's had a very steady hand for at least 3 years, I'd go with. I don't know about you, but I think there's maybe a divide in timeline somewhere along the line. But for at least 3 years, he was an overwhelming positive.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, considering when he came in where Villa were absolute at the depths of, a chasm, as I would describe it. And, to think that within 5 years, the plan was get back into Europe. On his last game at Villa, that's where they got to. So you can't really argue with that. And I think, as you say, it's very difficult to sort of say how someone's performed at a board level, when we're not there behind the scenes day in and day out. But you can sort of, you can make some judgments. And I think, as you say, those 3 years, first 3 years were very positive. I think maybe from the moment we maybe signed Danny Ings, I think was a bit of a confusing one. Then the Steven Gerrard hire.
That's the thing, man. So you can definitely put Gerrard down to Purslow. We've got that trail. We know that is an appointment that Christian Purslow was frankly delighted and eager to make.
Yes.
That obviously didn't go very well. But Villa have recovered in a very short space of time. So the damage was done, but it was a limited amount of damage. How involved he got in player transfers post Grealish, it's very hard to say with certainty. There are reports that suggest that, he quite fancied being a big part of it. And he was pretty involved in the Buendia, Bailey, Ings, Hall in return for Jack Grealish. Again, really hard for us to say with any sincerity that definitely happened, but there seems to be reports that would suggest that he has got involved in that aspect. And that's where the transfers, I think, started to take a slight downturn. Also, I think there's a relative amount of evidence to suggest that in his previous jobs, I speak to, friends of mine that support Liverpool and Chelsea and people that cover those clubs. He did the same thing. He was really good at what Christian Purslow is really good at. But every time he gets seduced by the idea of becoming a bit of a sporting director, and I'm just not sure that it is his strongest suit. He's really good at some things, not so good at others. We're all human beings. That's the case with everybody. I think for the third club in a row, Purslow was maybe just, dipped his toes in an area that maybe just isn't for him.
Yeah.
And Villa have, to their credit, they reeled him back in big time.
Yeah.
You can always tell how well Villa are doing by the number of appearances Christian Purslow is making on Sky Sports News. The correlation is the fewer appearances he is making, the better the club are performing on the pitch. I don't know if that is the secret behind form or not, but it's a clear pattern. And as part of the reshuffle, Villa have moved on.
Yeah, it certainly felt like, when Sawiris, the reports were that Sawiris stormed out of the Fulham game, that 3-0. Sawiris is the one who pushed for Unai Emery, and Purslow's presence was much lower profile since that moment. You could sense the things, and then Chris Heck coming in, to cover the marketing side. I think from the reports today is that Purslow was offered a new role but decided to step down. And then you also think of that Mathieu Alemany link at Barcelona, and now also Monchi at Sevilla.
And Johan Lange seemingly being kind of, I'm going to go with move sideways.
Yeah.
I don't think he's been demoted.
No,
but agree. His role has changed. I think he's made a sideways move into a slightly different area. So there's been lots of reshuffling there.
Yeah, for sure. And I mentioned Monchi. I mean, I've covered him on this channel.
Monchi.
The reports from John Percy in the Telegraph today as well that Villa are looking to pay, or would be willing to pay, a £1.7 million compensation to Sevilla to bring him to Villa. I mean, you cover La Liga quite a lot. You watch European football a lot, and I'm sure you know a lot about Monchi. What do you think about that link?
So, Monchi, interesting one. Depends who you speak to, because at Sevilla, he's a god. At Roma, he's about as unpopular as it gets. And you speak to people at Roma, you speak to people that cover Roma, and they will tell you that what he did with their money during that period where they had a lot of money to play with really damaged the club and set them back multiple transfer windows. His allocation of like quite a big spend to someone like Javier Pastore, who was very injury prone, a very high wage, like 25, 27 million pounds back in the days when that was a lot. He didn't do a great job. At Sevilla, he's done an amazing job. And it's not as simple as saying, well, he's great in Spain and not elsewhere. That would be very silly. I wonder if it's to do with their expectation of the team, because he's such a wheeler dealer, Monchi. He'll sell high and he'll buy low. And what tends to happen when he's in charge is squad refreshes happen very often. And player personnel, it's a bit more like a carousel, to be honest with you. He will sell and buy half a squad every summer. As we know with clubs like Southampton, clubs like Leicester, examples there. If you change your personnel and you consistently sell at the top and then reinvest, eventually you're going to get a couple of transfers wrong. Yeah. And then you won't hit the height that you're expected to. And the drop can actually be pretty severe. Joke there about Sevilla. But I mean, generally, I think with Roma, they were a club who potentially needed, one or two new pieces every year to keep gradually moving up the gears and maybe challenge. And Monchi's approach is much more like, I'm going to sell 10 and buy 10. And Roma were not at the stage in the hierarchy of Serie A where that was the correct approach. That's my feeling on it. And for Sevilla, it's been a little bit more liquid, and that suits them a little bit better. Now, his eye for talent cannot be questioned. However, the approach he takes clearly doesn't work at every level of the game. So the key question is, if that's what Monchi is, does that suit Villa? And can Unai Emery handle that?
Yeah, and I guess they have worked before at Sevilla. The 3 seasons they had together there. So where they won the Europa League 3 times in a row. Of course, they did it Sevilla, but I have some reservations about it. But at the same time, you sort of think, well, Emery's worked with him before and wants to work with him again. I think with the way Emery's performed this season, it's difficult to question any of his moves, really. But there's obvious movements in the boardroom, but there will also be movements within personnel. And there's already been a big signing for Aston Villa. They've signed the former Leicester midfielder Youri Tielemans, 26 years of age. I'm happy with it. I think he's a decent player, good on the ball in difficult situations in the midfield. But I know you have some reservations about this. So would you like to sort of elaborate on what your reservations are about Tielemans coming to Villa?
Yeah, so obviously take it all with a pinch of salt, because the reality is that Youri Tielemans is a fine footballer, and Unai Emery can make almost anything work. And I will draw another parallel here for you. My concerns about Youri Tielemans, which I'll detail to you, they would also apply to Dani Parejo. And Unai Emery had Dani Parejo playing at a crazy level, Champions League semi-final level, right? So pinch of salt and all that. And I understand that my concerns they're not bulletproof, but Tielemans bothers me a little bit just because he's very slow. and he really struggles to cover a large amount of ground. Now, I don't think Villa have had a particular problem with this under Emery. I think Villa have done a really good job, actually, of constricting the spaces between the lines, moving forward and back across the pitch, meaning that the midfielders are very rarely left in a position where they have to cover like 40 square yards, unlike it was, with Gerrard, where everybody was falling over trying to close gaps and stuff. Yeah. Like Emery's done a really good job of coaching a very good system where everybody feels proximate to each other and very well connected. But sometimes games break into chaos. Sometimes counter presses work. Sometimes transitions happen. And this is where Tielemans, he really struggles. Like, he's not very quick. He's a small man with short legs. And when he does engage in a sprint, it looks a bit, ropey. So just from a base point of like the current athleticism, required at the top level of football, Tielemans' lack of mobility and lack of ability to cover larger areas, that does bother me a little bit. I also am a little bit concerned about the fact that while this may be a bit of a victory as a free transfer, obviously no transfer is free, and for FFP reasons, that may be a necessity.
Yeah.
Tielemans has now played about a decade of senior football, despite being only 26. He started ridiculously early at Anderlecht. And he was really good really early. So while I do think that Emery will get a really good level out of him because he's a really good coach, and if you were looking for someone to maybe step in and out for Douglas Luiz, Tielemans actually got quite very similar ball playing ability. Are his best years behind him? I think possibly.
Right.
And have Villa just given this guy a 4-year deal on what is presumably a pretty handsome wage?
Right.
When he's not run his race, but he's played 40,000 senior minutes.
Yeah.
He's so ahead of time
in
terms of reaching certain milestones in terms of yards run and games played. Coming from a position of watching Villa over the last 10 years and really mismanaging some of these contracts, I don't need to give the examples, but watching Bon Lahore and Micah Richards hoover up their 50, 60 grand in the Championship and stuff like that. It's really unpleasant, right? We've all got our scars. This is the sort of thing where I go, just given Tielemans his last big contract on the downslope for 4 years, and it's 100 grand plus, mate. A week. It's clearly going to be like that, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. As you say, I think he's played close to 450 career games already at 26, and
it's a hell of a it's a whole career.
This man has
played an entire career.
Yeah. There are a lot of players that start young. I think Rooney's a good example of that. Somebody who came through at 16 and was just peaked early, and sort of Bellingham.
I'm the champion of this argument. I'm the one that was always sat there on Twitter going, these guys are playing too much football, like Pedri, Saka, Bellingham. They're all playing too much football. They're all going to break at 28. It's not okay. The Rooney example is fine, except that obviously he had alcohol issues, so it did accelerate the decline. But if you don't like the Rooney example, and some people would say, no, that doesn't count, Lukaku is in a very similar boat.
Yes.
He physically, he peaked 2 years ago. Yeah. And he is 29 now or something like that. This stuff does happen. You have to shift it all forwards. It will happen to Pedri and Bellingham and Saka and Martinelli if they carry on playing the amount of games they're playing. The opposite to this is Phil Foden, who barely gets to play and will presumably be amazing at 45 because he's just waiting his time. But Tielemans, he's 26. He's not 26 in football years.
Right.
But that's not the only concern. It's the mobility issues. I think I'm a little bit wary. But again, I'll bring it back to, trust in Unai and the fact that it's a good system and he can step in as, I'm presuming this is a backup, a rotator for Douglas Luiz. So. He's not a first choice player, is he?
No, I don't think so.
Not right now as at carte blanche. But
no.
So can you get too mad at that? Am I wasting my energy?
yeah. I guess with the sort of the European Conference games next season, I think if you were to look at it and think Sunday we start Douglas Luiz, Thursday night we start Youri Tielemans. That's not bad, is it? I think Tielemans playing Europe, and maybe he will be managed. Maybe he won't play as much football next season. And I guess at this stage in his career, he's had a couple of really good seasons at Leicester. Last season didn't really work for any player there, really, to be honest. But I do wonder if Unai Emery is the exact right coach for him at the right time. And maybe even, sometimes Emery likes to be versatile with where players play. I sometimes I sort of wonder in my head if someone like Ezri Konsa might be at right back a bit more next season. But also with Tielemans, I do wonder, could you imagine him maybe playing in the Buendia role, like sort of off Watkins at all? You don't think that will happen?
I don't. I think he's purely a 6 or an 8. Like a double midfield pivot now. Arguably 4-3-3, play him as one of the 8s, but those other guys, they need to have some serious athleticism to cover. Yeah. And Leicester have obviously always done that with guys like Wilfred and Didi. So I think they've used him really well, and they accept that he has certain weaknesses. And again, Aston Villa can't pick perfect players.
Yeah,
they're not yet in that situation where you get the cream of the. You don't get to sign Bellingham. You don't get to sign perfect players. There's always going to be a few issues here and there with anyone you play. But I mean, I'll sort of play devil's advocate to my own argument. I'm worried about the amount of minutes in Tielemans' legs. I'm worried about whether or not he is maybe past his, just past his peak. He's now going to step into a situation for, I think, the first time in his entire career where he is not a week-to-week player. Does that massively help him? Yeah. Does it prolong his career? Him playing 25 games next season might just be the best thing that ever happens to this man, because he's played 50 games a season for 8 years.
Yeah, and it's I mean, to think that Villa as well have strengthened the centre mid, which a year or 2 years ago, centre mid always seemed to be the area that we were all really frustrated by, and it suddenly feels like Villa's centre mid area is just really strong now, and not for that much money spent kind of on transfer fees, I guess.
I'll throw one more thing into the mix that you may not have realised. When Tielemans broke through at Anderlecht, I remember him breaking through. I remember writing an article about him when he was 17. He played next to Leander Dendoncker.
Oh, did he? Right. Wow.
At Anderlecht. They came through together. Right. And actually, the catalyst for Tielemans upping his level, he actually did play as a 10 back then when he was 17, 18. Mm-hmm. He scored a boatload of goals from outside the box, or just inside the box, over the course of one incredible 6-month span. And he got given the license and the attacking freedom. And the catalyst for it was they brought Dendoncker into the team and solidified the base of midfield. And the two of them had a really, really good relationship.
Right.
So I just find it funny how it all comes full circle. But one thing that people may not realize is that Tielemans and Dendoncker already have, from their younger days coming through at Anderlecht, a really strong on-pitch relationship.
Right.
And so if you then go from okay, first choice, let's go with Douglas Luiz and Boubacar Kamara. That's your first choice midfield. And then you roll in the next set, you swap it round. You put Tielemans and Dendoncker, throw back to the Anderlecht days as a partnership. It's not a bad idea, is it?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, it's as I said, at Conference League, you can see it. You can see it where Tielemans and Dendoncker might start, and just hopefully that can keep Villa's momentum going in the league if Kamara and Luiz are more regularly starting in the Premier League. It's good options, you'd think.
And Kamara stays fit.
Oh, yeah, please God. What a player. So obviously the centre midfield now looks very strong for Villa, but so where else do you think in Villa's kind of team do you think they need to strengthen?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I think I could give you about 6 different answers, and that's not to say that the team is in need of surgery at all. It's just that the situation that Villa are in, you can quite feasibly see 6 positions where you could go out and buy one player of extreme quality, and you could make an argument for right back, striker, right mid, possibly centre back, genuinely, and Villa need to get a proper backup goalkeeper so badly as well. So I think what I'll do is I'll cheat and say that the one area that Villa absolutely need to improve upon is speed. Right. And that can apply to multiple positions. When Alex Moreno was brought in January, the one thing he brought that Villa did not have outside of Bailey and Watkins was a bit of speed. And still now, with Moreno unlikely to start the season, and Bailey shouldn't really be on the he should be trying to find a better player than Leon Bailey.
Yeah.
Although fair play to him for stepping up in those last 3-4 games and delivering some really important moments. I genuinely didn't think he had that in him, and he proved me wrong there. Speed. Villa are a slow team without those 3 players, and that's a massive problem. I think it's something that the last 2 to 3 managers have really, really struggled with. It's not quick enough. So the easiest way to find speed here is to go and buy a quick forward. You know, play him on the right hand side, or you know, get a striker or a right mid. I think as a pacey player. But I think that's where Villa have to look. Any addition in that forward line has to be fast. You just have to have speed and ability to beat a man, because without the 3 players I've mentioned, it's slow.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, personally, for me, I think the 2 areas I'd really like to see, not necessarily an improvement, but different options, is that, you know, the Buendia role and the Bailey role, like those 2 positions. I think it's consistency sometimes with both players. I've seen them be unplayable, and I've seen them more so than other players in the team. I think I don't know whether their level has really jumped up in the way that everybody else's hasn't since Unai Emery came in. But, you know, you talk about speed, and are there any sort of specific players in your head that you would like to see Villa maybe linked with, or you think could work at Villa?
So I really like the Samu Chukwueze links. I really, really like those links. And to be fair as well, keeping it Villarreal, Nicholas Jackson as well. And we're in a situation here where presumably Villa can afford either of these players, based on the fact that I think you could get either of them for less than 40 million. So they're in Villa's budget. Now, Unai Emery has worked with these guys, so he's the ultimate test as to whether or not he thinks they're the right move. And I think we all kind of expected a Dan Juma move in January, and Emery was like, "Nah, I don't really want him." And I was like, "Oh, you would know, because you've played with him and you've actually got the best out of him. Probably the best form Dan Juma's ever had is under Emery." So I think, one of those 2 I really like the idea of. Chukwueze has really, really come on this year. Big leap. So I think the other thing you have to factor in here for this right side role or the forward role is you want the speed, but you need the productivity, and you need to buy a player who has already taken that leap and can provide that. Now it's a very treacherous argument, you know, when you're moving players in across different leagues. I think Leon Bailey had the production at Leverkusen to suggest that would have been fine. He's found it way more difficult. But Chukwueze this year has been really, really good. And he's finally put that finishing touch on his game. And it reminds me a little bit of, do you remember when Vinicius Jr. used to beat 3 players and then miss from 2 yards?
Yes.
And Raheem Sterling was the same, you know, 8-10 years ago. He used to literally beat 3 or 4, dribble to almost the goal line, and then hit the post. And you'd be like, So fortunately, most wingers grow out of that at some point. Something just goes and you're good. And Chukwueze found that this year. And I will say that Nico Williams has not yet got there.
Right.
So he's the other La Liga link, isn't he? And he is not there, mate. Trust me. I mean, I've just spent the season watching Athletic Club. You know, my podcast Ranks has a partnership with New Balance, and we've been out and watched Athletic Club, and we've been to the training facilities and all, had amazing access. So I've watched them all season and I've seen them in the flesh. And Nico is a frustrating player there. He could be glorious. He could be a glorious player. But you know, a transfer fee, it creates expectations, right? And he's a 40 million, 50 million player. And if that 40, 50 million winger comes in and misses a bunch of easy chances, the patience isn't there.
No. Particularly in that role where we currently have inconsistencies. I think if somebody else came in with a big fee and was inconsistent, I think there'd be a lot of frustration with that. But
definitely,
I kind of veer towards thinking that, you know, I don't think Villa are going to go with big Galactico signings this summer. Not that we really could, but big, I guess, sort of the more famous names. Because I just sort of think that kind of Alex Moreno signing, 14 million quid, a canny signing who can, you know, Emery can raise the level of. I sort of feel like that's his track record generally. I think he likes to work with maybe some quite unfashionable players. Do you think that's is that kind of what the way Villa will go this summer, do you think, rather than making these big £50 million signings?
Well, that's the argument behind someone like Nicholas Jackson, who emerged at the start of this season at Villarreal, having barely played any senior football as far as I can see. But Emery brought him into the fold and stuck him on the wing, and bang, he's absolutely flying. And genuinely, I remember in October or November, just before the World Cup, probably October, Nicholas Jackson kept scoring for Villarreal. It kept flashing up on my phone. And I was like, who is this guy? Like,
yeah.
how do I not know this person? I feel like
Yeah.
I should know just about everybody at the top level. You know, if they scored a goal, like I shouldn't, and they scored like 5 goals in the last month, and I still don't really know who the bloke is. That is an example of Unai Emery plucking someone out of the ranks and going, let's give you a role.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, actually, Villarreal ended the season playing Nicholas Jackson up front as a single striker.
Right.
They had some injuries and they had some problems and they had to stick him up front. I think he got like 5 goals in 5 games to finish off the season. He scored some absolute worldies as well. So look what you can do with a player. Look what you can do with the power of coaching, which is what we're all so excited about with Emery. And it does beg the question, like, I haven't checked in on him because I don't really watch the Championship, but like, is Philogene Bidace in line for some kind of absolutely stunning, unheralded rise that none of us realize? Like is that the next one? Who knows, man?
Yeah, that's the thing with the youth players is that, we've got a few who've done well in the Championship. Aaron Ramsey, Cameron Archer.
Yeah.
And by all accounts that Cardiff fans I've spoken to, Philogene Bidace has done well this season at Cardiff. As you say, you just sort of like, I don't know, maybe in the US preseason trip, a couple of these guys will play and feature and do really well. And maybe Emery sees something he can work on there. But, Villarreal, another player we seem to just keep constantly linked with La Liga at the moment. Pau Torres. What would you think about that one?
Bothers me.
Right.
That one bothers me, yeah. I don't go intentionally against the grain all the time, by the way, guys. Right. For anyone watching that's never interacted with me, I'm not just a naysayer. But Pau Torres is a really, really good ball-playing centre-back. I have some pretty serious doubts about his willingness and ability to engage in the really physical and combative part of the game, which is obviously massive for centre-backs. But I think doubly concerning for Villa because he's left centre-back, left-footed, so you'd expect him to come in and play left side. So that means he's coming in probably in rotation with Tyrone Mings. What happens every single time Villa play a game of football without Tyrone Mings? Yeah, it's an absolute disaster. They get bullied at set pieces. They get out-muscled. It just doesn't work. Like for his flaws, and he still does have some, despite an amazing season, he is undroppable. Now, if you replace the undroppable Tyrone Mings, who Villa cannot defend set pieces, corners, or their box without, and replace him with a player that I'm suggesting isn't really up for the combative aerial fight, what the hell is going to happen? So I think these two factors combined make me extremely wary of Pau Torres. And then you add on the fact that he's probably a £40 million player. And I'm like, I would just steer clear. I genuinely would.
Yeah. My thinking on that one is that I think it's just a big name who might leave Villarreal. And I think that there's probably just media links that are like, well, an obvious one to make is Villa have money.
Yeah.
Have Unai Emery. And I think that might be happening quite a bit this summer. Probably
the Spanish radio stations are all over it, aren't they? They're like, which one? They spin a wheel and go, which one can we link with them today?
Yeah, I mean, Aston Villa kind of sounds like a Spanish football team as well. So, I mean, one area that slightly worries me as well, though, is Ollie Watkins has had such a great season, or since Emery came in at least. If he were to get injured, that's a bit of a worry. Do you think that's like a priority area Villa will look at this summer, is to somebody who's maybe versatile enough they can play on the right when Watkins is there, and if he gets injured can come in and play in his role?
Yeah, I mean, that would be ideal. I mean, look, it's not that easy to find that player. I mean, they do exist, but often they're just not good enough in either of the positions to actually be good enough to play for your squad, particularly if you're now a European team. So yes, ideally that would be the case, but it might genuinely be really hard to find that player. Nicholas Jackson is possibly that player, but without harping on about him the entire time. I think Brennan Johnson could do that. Forest staying up, bit of a spanner in the works there. And he just may not be accessible. But he is the kind of player. So the profile does exist there. If Watkins had got injured in the last 15 games of this season, it would have been an absolute disaster. It would have been curtains. There are like 4 players or 5 players that you can genuinely say that about. One is Emi Martinez, another is Tyrone Mings, a third is Douglas Luiz, and a fourth is Watkins. I think anybody else Villa could just about have got away with it.
Yeah.
But bear in mind the fact that Villa qualified for Europe by the skin of their teeth despite having all those players fit the entire time, except
Yeah.
Emmy for one half against Brentford. That tells you how fragile this is.
Yeah.
So you've got to go and find a player that can step in for Watkins, who's good enough to play an extended period if needed, but is also not going to be first choice. My friends, we are now in the Harry Kane conundrum. It has been a long time since Villa have had this problem.
Yeah.
But that is a really, really difficult spot to fill.
Yeah, for sure. We focus mainly on incomings, but outgoings as well. I mean, that's to come a point where Villa have to make money as well somehow. And
yeah,
do you think there will be many outgoings this summer, or do you think there might be one or two surprises? Like, I mean, obviously, Emi Martinez he just naturally will catch attention, being the high profile keeper he is. But do you think there might be any outgoings this summer?
I mean, there just has to be, but it's about trying to find, some value in those if you can. I mean, Nakamba's obviously going to leave.
Yeah.
Luton getting promoted there could be the best thing that ever happens to him, because presumably Luton can put 3, 4, 5 million on the table for Villa and say, go on. And Villa will go, yeah, fine. Absolutely fine. If you can get back 3 to 5 million on Marvelous Nakamba, everyone's happy.
Yeah.
And it's probably the same thing to be said about Morgan Sanson, unfortunately. I know there are Villa fans out there who are convinced that he's excellent and just needs to be given a shot. But every time I've seen him play, he's been mostly useless, unfortunately. He's surprisingly fast, is my scouting report on Morgan Sanson, and there hasn't been a lot else. I know it's tough to get into a team, new country, injuries. I know it's hard. And I swear every time he plays, it's pouring down with rain, which makes it even harder. But it just hasn't happened, right? So I think it's time for that ship to sail. Then you've got a bunch of players who you have to decide whether or not they go out on loan again, or they stick around for squad depth reasons. And this Frankie is where it gets really tricky, because Villa are going to play this 2-legged Conference League qualifier, and it's going to be in late August, I think.
Yeah.
And that will determine what size the squad needs to be.
Yeah.
So as much as you want to plan the perfect loan for Cameron Archer, if you're not going to use him, or the perfect loan for Aaron Ramsey, if you're not going to use him, you don't know if you need him or not until August the 30th or something.
Yeah.
How are you supposed to plan a perfect loan for a player if you don't know if you need him until 2 days before the end of the window?
Yeah.
It's going to be really tough for those players and really tough for the club to figure this out, because you're taking a gamble one way or the other if you sanction those moves before the qualifier.
Yeah. And there's a couple I do wonder. I mean, maybe we mentioned Dendoncker earlier, but if Emery has faith in one or two of the youth players and thinks actually they might be able to step up, I could imagine, like in a Roadbenham, for instance, another player has performed well in the Championship by all accounts, even though QPR sort of fell off the radar. If he looks like somebody who can step up, maybe he might say, well, if we can get 8 million for Dendoncker, 10 million, then
I'd be a bit lucky for that one, mate.
Yeah.
If we get 5 million for Dendoncker. But yeah, it's possible. Like him, he's on the bubble. I'm sure a lot of players are in that similar situation. Like you could make the argument about Callum Chambers as well. I mean, I think Villa will need four centre halves to go into the season. So it may be ill-advised to move on from Callum Chambers, but he needs to be happy with a very bit part role, because those 15-minute cameos at centre mid, they're gone with Tielemans in.
Yeah.
So the only place he can play is right back, where I actually kind of expect Villa to strengthen. It's probably the one position we haven't mentioned in terms of incomings. Like it does seem, doesn't it, like Unai Emery is looking for something slightly different to Matty Cash at right back.
It does feel like that, doesn't it? The indications are there. And I sort of keep an eye on David Raya at Brentford. I don't know. Not for me.
No, he's good, but I think he's good. I think if he goes anywhere, he's going to go Spurs, man.
Do you think he's Spurs?
I think he's a 30-40 million pound signing for Spurs if he's anything, or maybe Man United, like genuinely. But he's not going to be a backup keeper.
Yeah, I guess it's in my head if say someone came in with 70 million for Emmy and Villa had to replace him somehow.
In that sense, I'll give you that.
Yeah,
I just don't think anybody's going to pay for Emi Martinez, man.
I hope they don't. I love the man. I love, I think in a way, like he sometimes bails out the high line if he has to make a massive save. That's what his real strength is those shot stopping. But also, on the ball, I think he has improved.
Massively, yeah, massively. Those little clipped passes that he just drops into the fullback on the touchline either side.
Yeah,
the shape on those balls has got so much better over the course of Emery's tenure. It's so noticeable.
Yeah,
and like you always feel like, I know there's a lot of like outpouring of emotion for Neil Cutler. when he's sadly moves on with the coaching change, and it's like it's been a big part of the team and stuff. But like, look at the results, look at the change that's happened. Like, it's not always the case that these kind of situations end up badly. Emi Martinez has clearly learned a lot from the new regime and the new goalkeeping coach.
Yeah, completely. He's just and I just love having a character like him at Villa, like a real winning mentality. That I think Villa, for a long time, we've been far too polite as a club, and teams like playing at Villa Park. I want it to become a place that teams do not like playing at Villa Park, and hopefully that's changing under Unai Emery. To be honest, it's the first time we've chatted since Emery joined Villa. Online rather than in live, but what do you? What have you made of it, really?
What the hell, man?
Like, can you believe that Villa made Europe? Can you believe the job that Emery has done at Villa?
Okay, so obviously, I can't believe what he's done in terms of 16th to 7th. It's absurd. And the margin for error was so small. And I thought Villa had blown it at Wolves.
Yes.
I really thought that was it. I thought Villa were about to blow it at Brentford, and they nicked a point.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, okay, it's still alive. And then Wolves happened, and it was like that might be it. But obviously, getting through those last games, beating Spurs, beating Brighton, absolutely huge.
Draw at Anfield.
And once Villa had got to 35 games, and the situation was very clear as to what was left, who they were playing, and what the situation. I was like, yes, Villa will make it. 100%. Villa will make it.
Yeah.
But after Wolves, which I think was 34, maybe game 34, I was like, it's gone. And obviously, up until that point, I never actually believed anyway, because it was ridiculous. Like, the points per game that you'd need was crazy. So I can't believe it. But I also I sussed it out, and I realized it was going to happen after game week 35, basically. So not a lot of time to compress a lot of emotion and excitement there. Yeah. It's been remarkable, mate. I mean, I don't know if there's any more that can be said about that kind of run. For what it's worth, I put together a little Premier League manager of the season list, and I actually put Arteta top. Because I think he has massively overachieved with that team, despite the fact that he didn't win the league. Like, the fact that Arsenal were in that conversation at all, in that position, 80+ points with that team, is amazing. Yeah. I put Emery second, because it's a similar argument. How the hell has Emery done this? And I got quite frustrated with the amount of people that believe Roberto De Zerbi was the manager of the season.
Yeah,
because he took over a team that they were fourth when he took over. Yeah. They'd won like 4 games and drawn 1 and lost 1. Like, they were in great nick. They had a great squad. They were really confident, really happy. They were in the top 4. They had like 13 points after like 6 games. And the sort of analogy I made was that De Zerbi stepped onto a speedboat and maybe installed a NOS button. Unai Emery stepped onto the sunken carcass of the Titanic and raised it from the depths. So which job is harder, Frankie?
Yeah, exactly. That was the exact point I made as well, because it was just at the end of the season reviews, and I saw so many sort of saying, lauding De Zerbi, and obviously he's done a very good job.
Amazing. And the football has been exceptional.
Yeah, and that final game of the season, Villa Brighton, I think if you're a neutral watching that, it was a fantastic game of football. Like, 2 teams really. I was feeling the pressure and all that, but
mate, I don't ever want to go back there mentally.
No. But I think it was just 2 teams that were so confident of playing football. And I think that Brighton were doing that from the start of the season when they had Potter. Villa were not doing that. So I think that what Emery was able to do to transform this club in such a short space of time and show a high footballing IQ, but also show an EQ as well, the emotional side of it, where he can get these players believing and wanting to perform and having such resilience, like that 1-1 draw at Anfield, 7 wins in a row for Liverpool. They look really on fire. And to be able to just resist that, that pressure at Anfield when they're going for the Champions League as well, to come back from losses and always play well the next game. It's not the Villa that I've grown used to for a long time. It's a very unique time, I think, to be a Villa fan.
It is, mate. Yeah, it is. I mean, look, you've got to do your very best wherever you are in the world if you're a Villa fan to try and make sure you get out and watch a European game, either at Villa Park or abroad if you're so lucky this season, because while obviously I do believe that this is the continuation of a very positive trajectory, and I don't think this will be the last time Villa will be in Europe in the next 5 years. I distinctly remember thinking that everything was fine and everything was good back in 2010 when Villa had been in Europe for 3 straight years, and then 13 years went by. Villa went down, Villa nearly went out of business. Villa survived on the last day. All sorts of stuff has happened, and in those 13 years, there's been more lows than highs, and definitely no European football. Any midweeks, Rotherham and Barnsley, mate. That's it. Those were the midweek games. They weren't the other ones. So try and make the most of it. That's what I'm going to try and do. So, if you can, if you're in a position to enjoy it and make the most of it. Starting with that qualifier, which I'm pretty worried about, mate, because I've seen the names. I don't know if you've seen the names of the teams that Villa might have to face. And
I saw a couple. What were the biggest ones?
Juventus.
Yeah,
was a bit. I mean, I actually don't know what Juventus are going to look like over the course of next season. I mean, Villa keep getting linked to Dusan Vlahovic, their star striker, but as it stands, Villa are an unseeded team for that playoff. No team qualifies for the Conference League automatically. Every single team has to play a playoff. They have to get through a playoff. There's no group stage at all. There's no guarantee, nothing, which is a really cool way of creating a meritocracy. Yeah. But Villa are top of the unseeded pot. And at the top of the seeded pot, they could draw Juventus, Eintracht Frankfurt, Fenerbahce, Ghent, AZ Alkmaar, Club Brugge. It's like all of these teams are beatable for Villa. Juventus and Eintracht are really hard to beat, but they're beatable. It's not like they're playing City or whatever. Yeah. But that is nervy stuff. And then if there's 8 teams that if they lose their second round qualifier, Villa will move up into the seeded group. So if one of the 8 teams loses, of Bruges, Basel, Ghent, Fenerbahce, Cluj, Midtjylland, PAOK, Panathinaikos, Maccabi Tel Aviv, and Victoria Plzeň. If any of them lose, Villa move up into the top seeded tier. Right. And then rather than looking at playing Basel, AZ Alkmaar, Club Brugge, you're hoping to play Vitoria Guimarães, CSK Sofia, Hapoel Beersheva. It's a slightly different caliber of team, isn't it?
Yeah. I think that's the fear, isn't it? I think slightly, I'd back Villa to beat, the likes of Frankfurt and Fenerbahce, but it's also that new experience, these players, whereas Fenerbahce and Eintracht Frankfurt won the Europa League last year, and Fenerbahce are regular in Europe every season. I think it'd be that experience of going to Istanbul and a stadium that none of these players have really been in, and a totally different experience. I can, like West Ham got used to it, and they got through it. Whereas I think Villa, it'd probably be a bit hairy at first, like trying to just get your head around it. But
there's some players there, like obviously Emi Martinez has won a World Cup, what it is, whatever. Alex Moreno has played in Europe most of his life, I assume. He's 29 now, isn't he? Camara, Champions League nights for Marseille. Bailey, Europa League, Champions League for Leverkusen. So if you look through the team, there's dollops of it. But, the centre-back partnership, never played a game in Europe.
Yeah, exactly.
Matty Cash, never played a game in Europe. Douglas Luiz, never played a game in Europe, I don't think.
He has, no.
Ollie Watkins never played a game. So it's like, well, actually, I just listed off most of the key pillars that I mentioned earlier. The players that if the team didn't have would fall apart. And most of them have never played a Thursday game in Europe at all. Yeah. But then, Tyrone Mings has played the Euros. So, how much can you read into it? I don't know. But it's certainly making me nervous, and it's only mid-June.
Yeah. I guess as a final question for Rano, how do you feel about where Villa are right now as a club, and how sort of optimistic or, cautious or whatever do you feel kind of about where Villa might go in the next season under Unai Emery?
So yeah, I think probably cautiously optimistic is the way to describe it. I'm pretty convinced in the project. I'm pretty convinced in the vision and the funding, and I'm very convinced in the coach. And for the most part, this is a brilliant group of players that have earned the trust of the fans, and there's every reason to be excited. The cautious bit comes from the fact that there are only really 7 spots in the Premier League which can get you into European competition. I know West Ham have just won the Conference League, so they've got in as the 8th team, but let's call that irregular. And let's say there's a top 7. It's pretty busy up there, mate. Villa are trying to elbow their way in consistently. Newcastle have just stomped their way in and will presumably stay there for the foreseeable future, being the richest club in the world. Tottenham have just finished 8th and Chelsea have just finished 12th. Is that repeatable? Is that logical? Not really. And I think maybe to answer the question, how are you feeling about it all? Frankie, you and I are probably more used to spending our summers checking to see what the newly promoted teams or the teams that just survived last year have signed in terms of like a striker to see if they might have a few more goals in them this year. Nowadays, I don't know about you, but I'm worried that Tottenham have nailed it with Postecoglou. Yes, I'm worried that they're going to sign David Raya and they're finally going to modernise their goalkeeping position. So I've gone from being worried about what West Ham are doing and worried about what Leeds are doing to worrying that Tottenham are going to sort themselves out. That probably answers the question, doesn't it? Yeah. Because that is indicative of where Villa are right now in the landscape. You're worried that Tottenham might get better and rebound because you finished above them last year and you're going to be fighting tooth and nail for them again this term.
Yeah, well, honestly, Sam, it's been absolutely brilliant to talk to you. I feel like I could chat football with you for the next 24 hours or week or whatever, until the qualifiers in August, to be honest. But, before we go, just for those who might not know, where can we find you and your work online?
Yeah, so Ranks FC podcast, just search Ranks FC every Wednesday in Spotify. You can find it. I'm on Twitter, Tighe Football. It's Tighe is the surname. We make, obviously, you and I have a little joke where we're clearly Irish, but don't sound like it somewhere down the line. So you can find me on Twitter as well. I'm quite often tweeting about Villa nowadays because I'm very excited.